All right, so today I want to talk about this story at a global, and it says Canada's current deficit level will be unsustainable within 1 to 2 years. Parliamentary Budget Office. And I'm not going to get into the article, so you can go check it out if you want. But this is a big issue in Canada. I mean, this is a big issue in many areas, but Canada, especially in that um, the deficit for this year is already, I think it's upwards of a $500 billion, so 500 billion. Um, and the problem too is that that's going to have, it's not something that's going to go away either. Like this is just how bad things are in Canada. That I think the expected deficit this year was around 30 billion. I mean, don't quote me on that number, but I think it was around 30 billion going into this year. And now we're upwards of a half a trillion, like 500 billion. And that's something that's not going to be sustainable. Like it's physically not sustainable. I don't believe. Now maybe someone would come up with an maybe I don't know. The problem is that our credit rating has already been downgraded. If you look at the major recessions, in recent history, they tended to happen with the same credit rating that we currently have, right? So that is going to be a huge problem. And this is the other thing to bring up too that I mean I've brought up before, but it's very important to reiterate that our economy was not very good going into this. We weren't like this. I mean, the state's economy wasn't as good as Trump and those kind of people were claiming, but it was solid. I mean, median wages were going up a little bit. Unemployment was low. I mean, like I say, unemployment's kind of a misleading number, but nonetheless, their economy was decent. But Canada's was not. I mean, we had, if you look at the last quarter of 2019 and the first quarter of 2020, we had no growth, and COVID had nothing to do with that, right? So um, we were pretty much in a recession before this whole virus situation came upon us. So yeah, we are in recession. This is the thing too. I constantly hear people bringing up now is, oh, the economy's, it's getting back going, and people say, oh yeah, there's a lot of jobs out there. Well, yeah, because we have what 15% unemployment in Canada, and we have a little more than that in Alberta. Like, yeah, there's jobs out there, but there's massive amounts of people applying to them. Like I've heard from employers, and they've said that yeah, there's jobs out there, but there's record amounts of people applying for said jobs. Um, so yeah, that's not happening. And again, I've heard you hear the stories too of people not wanting to go back for the lower wage stuff mainly. Like at this point, yeah, if you're on unemployment, there's no point in going back to a minimum wage job. That's the other thing too, is that if you're on unemployment or CERB, you're making the same amount as you are at your job. So why would you go back? And the Trudeau Liberals have already promised at least what is it, $400 a week, so 1,600 a month um, for up to, I think it's till the end of spring. I don't know exactly when it is, but I know it's well into 2021. And again, they keep pushing it back. So I think it's something they're just going to permanently keep pushing back. That there's already talks, and Justin Trudeau has hinted at it, of bringing in a UBI. Now, again, I don't think they'll call it a UBI because there's a lot of negative stigma around UBI, and rightfully so. They're going to call it something else, and they'll use this whole situation as an excuse to implement it, right? Like that's the way governments almost always get these kind of things passed. It is that they can't do it when times are good, right? So they either create a problem in society, or they simply allow a potential problem to get out of control, like this whole situation. They very well could have just opened things back up, and the economy would have taken a small hit, but things would have been pretty much back to normal right now. I mean, you look at Sweden and some of these other areas. I mean, South Dakota is another good example that they didn't lock down, and they're doing perfectly fine. They're doing perfectly fine right now. So again, I think that's what the government, the federal, at least at a federal level, that's what their goal was, is that they were going to exploit this situation to push more of their agenda through. And that's what's going to happen. So again, you have a double whammy in that there's not a lot of good jobs out there. I mean, like I say, a lot of people claim differently, but it's just not the case, right? And this is the way you would know too, that if there was a lot of good jobs out there, the people that want jobs would have no problem finding jobs. The problem is that if you want a minimum wage, garbage job, yeah, you can probably get it. But if you want anything with any sort of room to grow, or any sort of, decent pay, better than a minimum wage, yeah, it's pretty hard to find right now. Like pretty hard to find. So that's the first problem. And like I say, the other big problem too is that a lot of people don't even want to work, right? They don't want to work. So this is something that's going to be a problem in Canada going forward. And what is the biggest problem coming from this whole thing and from the problem in general is that the biggest problem is that most of the general public believe that if we have any problem in society when it comes to poverty or when it comes to just money in general, that we can always just print more, we can always just borrow more. And that is where that's the main reason why the left is fundamentally wrong in their worldview, is that they genuinely believe that there is an unlimited supply of resources, i.e., in other words, money, right, and resources. But anybody that has critical thinking skills and actually understands economics knows that there isn't an unlimited supply. If there was an unlimited supply, then I would be perfectly fine with giving away people, welfare and free healthcare and all this kind of stuff. But because there isn't an unlimited supply, we can't do that. Like it doesn't work out long term. And why does it not work out long term is that people consistently want more and more and more and more, because the minute you justify it in the first place, the average person takes that as, oh, there must be an unlimited supply, because if you're giving it away for free, then if you think of it, intellectually, there has to be by definition, right? Because if there wasn't an unlimited supply, why would you be giving it away for free, right? Because if there was limited supply, then anybody would logically think that, hey, that you can't do that, right? So that is why so many people believe that kind of stuff, and that's why whenever you bring up clawing back benefits, which is going to have to happen at some point, like at some point, benefits will be clawed back. Whether it's now or whether it's in the future, it will happen. It has to happen, right? Like if you're making $50,000 a year and you're spending $100,000 a year, at some point you're going to have to pay that bill, right? Like you can, max out your credit cards and take out a line of equity on this and that, and get a second mortgage. You can do a lot of things to sustain that lifestyle for a little bit, but it's impossible to maintain it in the long term. And that's exactly what the government's doing. And again, when you bring it up like this too, all of a sudden people start to realize how crazy it is, right? Like the Canadian government, what did they generate in revenue last year? I think it was like 250 billion. I know the number is they're spending about, of every dollar they spend, about half of it is borrowed, right? So again, that is pretty much the equivalent to making 50,000 a year and spending 100, right? Like that is what the government is doing. Now, the difference being is that the government can borrow at a much lower rate than the average person, which that's something Justin Trudeau brought up, which he is right about. But that doesn't make it okay, right? That only encourages more spending, right? That's why debt is so out of control, because the government can borrow at such a low rate, right? So that's the problem. The other problem too is that interest rates are probably going to have to go up at some point. Like mathematically, they pretty much have to go up at some point, because if they don't, then the creditors are going to risk never getting repaid, right? And the creditors want to get repaid. Um, and that's the problem, is eventually it gets to the point to where it's like, hey, these guys aren't going to be able to pay their bills, right? Um, and that's why this article is basically saying, yeah, the debt level is going to be unsustainable. And the debt level already is unsustainable, I believe. I don't think there's any way we will repay the $500 billion we're currently in. Now, that number is only going to get bigger. And not to mention, too, when you include provincial and municipal, I don't know if municipalities, it's much harder for them to go into debt, but especially provincial, like per capita, Ontario has, I think, one of the largest deficits, even if you compare them to every province and every state. I think per capita, Ontario is one of the worst deficits of all the provinces and states. So yeah, they're in a heap of trouble. Alberta's in a heap of trouble given our high unemployment rate and the fact that the East hates us, and the fact that, I mean, so many people from Alberta are simply sabotaging us by voting for crazy policies. Um, and the fact that the problem with, again, if you look at Alberta, like you have to choose between, if you're the UCP, you have to choose between debt and political suicide. Like that's what they have to choose, but they've chosen debt, which personally, I mean, I don't know what I would pick. I think it would be a very hard choice because, again, like I say, if they choose to be like, we're not going to run massive deficits this year because it's irresponsible, and it is, that would be the right decision. But the problem is that would be political suicide because the NDP would be all over them with, oh, they want people to suffer and all this garbage that they would bring up. But again, if you live in that, if you're the kids in the family that's making 50,000 a year and spending 100, do you, is it being cruel to the kids to claw back that spending? Well, in a way it is, but it's unsustainable, right? Like, and this is the problem too, is that people view it as, because they've gotten so used to the idea of free money, they view it as, oh, you're cruel and you hate the poor if you want to take away their free stuff. No, it's not that we hate them. It's that it's simply unsustainable, and they've been sold a bill of goods. Like, they've been sold a bill of goods. So this is probably one of the biggest issues in Canada going forward. In fact, I think it probably is. And it needs to be talked about more. Like, it needs to be talked about more. The problem is that we've dug ourselves a hole so deep, and given that the Liberals are still in power, that hole is going to continue to be dug deeper and deeper. And I don't think the Conservatives would be much better. I think they would be marginally better. I think they would be slightly better. Canada's in for a very, very dark path going forward. And I think it's going to take a complete collapse for people to wake up. And that's going to be very ugly when that happens. So anyway, if you liked the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, on BitChute, and on Parler. All those links are in the description, so you can find them all there.